The most dangerous secrets are never shouted across a room. They're whispered when everyone else is looking the other way. The Blackthorn Foundation Gala was the kind of event people spent months trying to get invited to. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the grand staircase, and some of the most influential names in the city moved through the ballroom with effortless confidence. Rowan Hale moved among them almost unnoticed. That was the advantage of being a maid. People looked through him instead of at him. Dressed in a simple black uniform, he carried a silver tray through the crowd, collecting empty glasses and exchanging polite smiles whenever guests acknowledged his presence. For most of the evening, everything appeared perfect. Wealth, power, and carefully rehearsed elegance filled every corner of the estate. But Rowan had learned long ago that appearances meant very little. Sometimes the smallest details revealed the biggest truths. Across the ballroom stood Grayson Voss. Even among politicians, executives, and celebrities, he commanded attention without trying. Tall, composed, and impossible to ignore, the Alpha businessman was known for building an empire that stretched across multiple industries. Rumors followed him everywhere. Some called him ruthless. Others called him brilliant. Most people simply called him untouchable. Rowan had never spoken more than a few words to him despite working several events hosted by the Voss organization. Tonight seemed no different. As the evening approached its end, guests began filtering toward the front entrance where a line of luxury vehicles waited beneath the glow of exterior lights. Security personnel quietly coordinated departures, while staff members assisted with coats and luggage. Rowan was preparing to return a serving tray when something unusual caught his attention. Near the driveway, Grayson's driver stood beside a black sedan. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. The man wore a professional expression and maintained perfect posture. Yet Rowan noticed a brief flicker of tension crossing the driver's face when Grayson appeared at the top of the front steps. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have seen it. Rowan did. His eyes narrowed. The driver immediately looked away. Then Rowan noticed something else. The driver's right hand remained strangely rigid against his jacket. His breathing had become slightly uneven. His gaze repeatedly shifted toward the vehicle before returning to Grayson. Fear, anticipation, anxiety. Rowan couldn't explain exactly why, but every instinct told him something was wrong. He placed the tray on a nearby table and moved toward the entrance. The Alpha was already descending the steps while assistants discussed tomorrow's schedule. Security remained alert, but none of them seemed concerned. Why would they be? The driver had worked for the company for years. As Grayson paused near the vehicle, Rowan stepped forward before doubt could stop him. One of the staff managers looked ready to protest, but Rowan had already reached the Alpha. "Sir," he said softly. Grayson turned, clearly surprised that a servant had approached him directly. Before anyone could react, Rowan reached up and adjusted the slightly crooked tie beneath Grayson's tailored coat. The movement looked natural, harmless, just a maid fixing a detail before an important guest departed. Several people barely glanced in their direction. Rowan leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Your driver has a gun." For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. Grayson's expression didn't change, not even slightly. Yet Rowan noticed the instant sharpness that entered his silver-gray eyes. The Alpha looked past him toward the waiting sedan. The driver froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. And suddenly Rowan realized one terrifying truth. Whatever was about to happen next, his life had just become connected to Grayson Voss forever. The silence that followed felt heavier than the entire evening had moments before. Rowan immediately stepped back, his pulse racing as dozens of possibilities flashed through his mind. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe he had misread the signs. Maybe he had just destroyed his career by accusing a trusted employee of something unimaginable. Yet the moment Grayson shifted his attention toward the sedan, the atmosphere changed. Security personnel who had appeared relaxed only seconds earlier suddenly became alert. Nobody shouted. Nobody panicked. Everything happened with controlled efficiency. Grayson remained calm, his expression unreadable as he adjusted the cuff of his coat. "Cancel the vehicle," he said quietly. It was such a simple instruction that several nearby guests probably assumed it was related to scheduling. But Rowan noticed the driver's face lose color almost instantly. The man opened his mouth as if preparing to say something, then quickly stopped himself. That reaction alone made Rowan's stomach tighten. Grayson noticed it too. Within moments, two members of the security team approached the driver and began speaking with him away from the crowd. The conversation appeared professional, but tension lingered beneath every movement. Rowan suddenly became aware that several pairs of eyes had turned toward him. Some belonged to security officers. Others belonged to assistants who looked deeply confused. One thing was becoming painfully clear. The quiet maid who nobody had noticed all evening had somehow become the center of attention. You. Rowan nearly jumped when he heard Grayson's voice. The Alpha was looking directly at him now. Come with me. Rowan's throat felt dry. He nodded before following Grayson through the entrance and into a private wing of the estate. The farther they walked from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. Plush carpets absorbed their footsteps while framed artwork lined the hallways. Finally, they entered a spacious office overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the lights of downtown several miles away. Grayson removed his suit jacket and draped it over a chair before turning toward Rowan. Explain. The single word carried enough authority to make Rowan stand straighter. I noticed his behavior, Rowan said carefully. His breathing was uneven. His posture changed when he saw you. He kept checking the vehicle. His right hand never moved naturally. Grayson listened without interruption. And that convinced you he had a weapon? Rowan hesitated. Not exactly. It convinced me he was hiding something. The Alpha studied him for several seconds. Most people would have ignored it. Rowan looked toward the windows. Most people do. That answer seemed to interest Grayson more than anything else. The room fell silent again. Then the office door opened. A security director entered carrying a tablet. His expression was unusually serious. Sir, we found an unregistered firearm inside the vehicle. Rowan felt the air leave his lungs. He had been right. Somehow that realization felt more frightening than reassuring. The security director continued speaking. The driver is being questioned. We are still determining how long this has been planned. Grayson nodded once. Leave us. The man immediately obeyed. When the door closed again, Rowan suddenly wished he were anywhere else. Instead, he found himself alone with one of the most powerful men in the city. Grayson stepped closer, not threateningly, but with unmistakable focus. Who are you really, Rowan Hale? Rowan blinked. I am exactly who the employee file says I am. I do not believe that. Rowan's heart sank. This was the problem. Nobody would believe a simple explanation. Nobody would believe a maid had noticed something experienced professionals missed. Grayson folded his arms. A servant identifies a threat moments before it is discovered. That is not normal. Rowan almost laughed from sheer exhaustion. Trust me, my life would be much easier if it were. For the first time all night, something unexpected appeared in Grayson's eyes. It was not suspicion. It was curiosity. And Rowan had the uncomfortable feeling that curiosity might become far more dangerous than distrust ever could. Rowan did not return to his apartment that night. Less than an hour after the conversation ended, two security personnel escorted him to a private guest suite located several floors above the main residence. The room was larger than the entire apartment he rented downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, while soft lighting illuminated elegant furniture that looked untouched. Rowan stood in the center of the room, feeling completely out of place. This was not protection. It felt more like observation. By sunrise, he learned he was not entirely wrong. A discreet knock came at the door shortly after 7 o'clock. When Rowan opened it, he found a woman holding a tablet. Mr. Hale, breakfast is served downstairs. Rowan frowned. Am I free to leave? The woman hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Mr. Voss has requested that you remain on the property for the time being. Rowan sighed. Exactly what he had expected. Downstairs, the atmosphere felt different from the polished glamour of the gala. Employees moved quietly through wide hallways while security personnel occupied nearly every visible entrance. Several conversations stopped the moment Rowan appeared. He could practically feel the stares following him across the room. A maid who had worked beside him at previous events quickly looked away when their eyes met. Another employee whispered something to a coworker before both immediately turned toward him. News traveled fast. By the time Rowan reached the dining room, everyone knew his name. Grayson was already seated at the far end of a long table reviewing documents. He barely glanced up when Rowan entered. Sit. Rowan obeyed. Fresh coffee sat beside a breakfast that looked expensive enough to pay a month's rent. Neither touched their food immediately. You checked my employee records, Rowan said. Grayson continued reading. I checked everything. And Grayson finally lowered the papers. You have no military background, no law enforcement training, no criminal history, no unusual education. Rowan lifted an eyebrow. Sounds disappointingly normal. That is the problem. Rowan almost smiled. Grayson looked genuinely frustrated by the lack of answers. Before either could continue, another man entered the dining room. He appeared to be in his late 30s, dressed impeccably, carrying himself with quiet confidence. Good morning, he said. His gaze immediately settled on Rowan. So this is him. Grayson nodded once. Rowan, this is Sebastian Knox. Rowan offered a polite greeting. Sebastian returned it with a friendly smile that somehow felt carefully measured. You have caused quite a stir, Sebastian said. Not intentionally. The most interesting things rarely happen intentionally. Something about the exchange made Rowan uneasy. He could not explain why. Sebastian seemed pleasant enough. Professional. Respected. Yet Rowan noticed a brief tightening around the man's eyes when Grayson mentioned the investigation. It vanished almost instantly. Most people would have missed it. Rowan did not. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Discussions centered around internal security reviews and employee interviews. Rowan remained mostly silent. The more he listened, the more he realized how serious the situation had become. Whoever had arranged access to the vehicle had understood security procedures exceptionally well. This was not random. Someone had knowledge from inside the organization. Later that afternoon, Rowan was escorted through the estate grounds. Officially, it was so he would not feel confined. Unofficially, he suspected security simply wanted to know where he was at all times. As he crossed a stone courtyard, he noticed two guards speaking near a fountain. The moment they saw him, one immediately looked away. The other lowered his voice. Again, most people would have ignored it. Rowan slowed his pace. Fear, nervousness, anticipation. The same combination he had seen before. His stomach tightened. Somewhere inside this estate, people were hiding something. And for reasons he did not yet understand. More than one person seemed worried that Rowan Hale might discover what it was. The next morning began with rain tapping softly against the estate's enormous windows. Gray clouds hung over the city, turning the skyline into a blur of steel and glass. Rowan sat alone in a quiet library reviewing a book he had not truly read for nearly 20 minutes. His attention kept drifting back to the guards near the fountain and the strange tension he had sensed throughout the property. Something was wrong. He could feel it growing closer, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. The door opened, and one of the household staff entered carrying a tray of coffee. Rowan thanked him and reached for the cup. The employee smiled politely before leaving. Nothing about the interaction seemed unusual. Yet as the door closed, Rowan noticed a faint tremor in the man's hand. The memory lingered in his mind. 20 minutes later, he lifted the cup toward his lips, but stopped. A strange feeling settled over him. It was not fear exactly, more like instinct. The same instinct that had made him notice the driver. Rowan lowered the cup and stared at the dark liquid. Something felt off. He carried it into the hallway where a passing housekeeper immediately froze at the sight of the untouched drink. Her reaction lasted less than a second before she recovered. But Rowan had already seen it. Alarm. Genuine alarm. Before he could ask questions, footsteps echoed from the opposite end of the corridor. Grayson appeared accompanied by two security officers. His expression sharpened when he saw Rowan holding the cup. Do not drink that, Rowan said quietly. The security officers exchanged confused looks. Grayson stepped forward. Why? Rowan struggled to explain. I do not know. I just... He glanced toward the housekeeper who now looked increasingly uncomfortable. Something is wrong. Grayson did not argue. He handed the cup to one of the officers. Have it tested. The officer immediately left. Rowan expected skepticism. Instead, Grayson studied him with growing concentration. Hours later, the results returned. A cleaning chemical had somehow contaminated the coffee. The substance was not fatal, but it could have caused serious illness. Investigators initially called it an accident. Rowan did not believe that. Neither did Grayson. By evening, additional security measures appeared throughout the estate. Guards doubled their patrol routes. Access codes changed. Staff interviews expanded. The atmosphere became tense. People whispered more often, smiled less frequently. Rowan sensed growing anxiety everywhere he went. Then came another incident. Shortly before sunset, he entered an elevator alone. The doors closed, and the car began descending. Halfway down, the elevator suddenly stopped. The lights flickered. Silence filled the confined space. Rowan felt his heartbeat quicken. Emergency systems should have activated immediately. They did not. Several long minutes passed before the elevator finally restarted. When the doors opened, security personnel were already waiting outside. Their arrival seemed almost too quick, almost as if someone had expected a problem. That night, Grayson summoned Rowan to his office. Rain continued falling beyond the glass walls while city lights shimmered below. "This is no longer about me," Grayson said. Rowan looked up. The Alpha's voice carried absolute certainty. "Someone is trying to remove you from this investigation." Rowan felt cold despite the warmth of the room. The realization settled heavily between them. The driver had been only the beginning. Whoever was responsible was still watching, still planning. And for reasons neither of them yet understood, Rowan Hale had become a threat they could not afford to ignore. The following morning brought no answers, only more questions. Rowan stood near one of the estate's eastern gardens, watching sunlight break through the storm clouds that had covered the city for days. The grounds looked peaceful. Birds moved between carefully trimmed hedges. Water shimmered across stone pathways still damp from rain. Yet beneath the calm surface, tension lingered everywhere. Security teams continued their patrols. Employees spoke in lowered voices. Every person seemed to be waiting for something. Rowan understood the feeling. He was waiting too. Shortly after breakfast, Grayson asked him to join a meeting in a private conference room. Several senior staff members were present, including Sebastian Knox. Reports covered employee interviews, access logs, and security reviews. Hours of investigation had produced surprisingly little. Whoever was behind the incidents understood the organization extremely well. They left no obvious trail. As Rowan listened, he found himself studying faces instead of documents. It was a habit he had developed years ago. When he was a child, his mother used to joke that he noticed things other people missed. A forced smile, a nervous glance, a hesitation before answering a simple question. Over time, those observations became second nature. He never thought much about it until now. During the meeting, one executive insisted the coffee contamination had been accidental. Another claimed the elevator malfunction was merely poor maintenance. Their words sounded reasonable. Their expressions did not. Rowan noticed uncertainty hidden beneath confidence. Fear disguised as professionalism. People were worried. Some because they lacked answers. Others because they knew more than they admitted. After the meeting ended, Grayson stopped him outside the conference room. "You were watching everyone." Rowan looked slightly embarrassed. "I always do that." "Why?" Rowan considered the question. "Because people say one thing and reveal another." Grayson folded his arms. "Explain." They moved into a nearby lounge overlooking the gardens. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Rowan decided to tell the truth. "When I was young, my father worked 3 jobs. He dealt with customers constantly. One day, he told me something important. He said people announce their intentions long before they speak them." Grayson listened quietly. "I started paying attention after that. Body language, facial expressions, eye movement, stress reactions. Eventually, it became automatic." Rowan gave a small shrug. "I am not psychic. I just noticed details." The Alpha remained silent for several moments. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed softly. It was brief, but genuine. "You have caused an entire security division to question itself because you are observant." Rowan smiled despite himself. "That was not my goal. Nevertheless, you were right." Later that afternoon, Rowan accompanied Grayson during a walkthrough of several company offices connected to the estate. Employees greeted the Alpha respectfully, but Rowan noticed something strange. Whenever Grayson entered a room, most people appeared relaxed. Whenever Rowan entered behind him, several individuals became visibly uncomfortable. Not hostile, nervous, as though his presence alone represented a problem. The realization unsettled him. Near sunset, they stopped beside a large window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. Grayson glanced at him. "You understand something now, do not you?" Rowan nodded slowly. "The person responsible is not afraid of being discovered by investigators." Grayson turned toward the skyline. "No." Rowan felt a chill. "They are afraid of being discovered by me." And for the first time since arriving at the estate, he fully understood why someone might want him gone. It was not because he possessed secrets. It was because he had a habit of uncovering them. The days that followed settled into a strange routine neither of them had expected. Rowan remained inside the estate while the investigation continued, yet the atmosphere around him gradually began to change. At first, security personnel treated him like an unpredictable variable. Employees avoided conversations. Meetings stopped when he entered a room. But as the week progressed, something shifted. People started noticing that Grayson trusted him. And when Grayson Voss trusted someone, others paid attention. Rowan noticed it during breakfast one morning when a staff member brought him coffee without appearing nervous. He noticed it again when one of the security officers asked for his opinion regarding a visitor who seemed unusually anxious during a routine meeting. The estate had begun adapting to his presence. What surprised Rowan even more was Grayson himself. The Alpha had always appeared distant, controlled, and impossible to read. Yet lately Rowan found himself seeing small details nobody else seemed to notice. Grayson started asking for his observations after meetings. He occasionally requested his opinion on employees. More surprisingly, he listened. One evening Rowan was reading in the library when he realized someone had entered the room. Looking up, he found Grayson standing near the doorway holding a stack of reports. "You are still awake," Grayson said. Rowan smiled faintly. "So are you." The Alpha glanced toward the clock. It was nearly midnight. Work does not disappear simply because the hour changes. Rowan closed his book. Neither do problems. Something about that answer made Grayson pause. Then, instead of leaving, he crossed the room and sat opposite him. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Through the tall windows, city lights glittered against the darkness. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Grayson asked a question Rowan had not expected. "Do you ever get tired?" Rowan blinked. "Of what?" "Watching everyone." Rowan considered that. "Sometimes." He looked toward the shelves surrounding them. "It is useful, but it can also be lonely. Once you notice what people are feeling, you start noticing what they are hiding too." Grayson nodded slowly. "I understand that." Rowan found himself studying the Alpha's expression. There was no deception there. No performance. Just quiet honesty. For the first time, he wondered how many years Grayson had spent carrying responsibilities nobody else truly understood. The following afternoon provided another reminder that the danger had not disappeared. A company executive arrived unexpectedly requesting an urgent private meeting with Grayson. Before the discussion began, Rowan happened to pass through the conference area. As he glanced through the glass walls, he noticed the executive repeatedly checking his phone. His smile looked forced. His confidence appeared manufactured. Most importantly, he seemed disappointed when informed that additional security personnel would be present. Rowan stopped walking. Something about that reaction felt wrong. An hour later, investigators discovered the executive had deliberately concealed important information connected to internal company contracts. The revelation stunned several senior managers. Grayson appeared less surprised. That evening, he found Rowan standing alone on a terrace overlooking the city. Cool wind moved through the night air while traffic lights glowed far below. "You were right again," Grayson said. Rowan sighed. "I wish that felt like a victory." The Alpha stepped beside him. "Why?" Rowan looked toward the horizon. "Because every answer creates two new questions." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Grayson did something unexpected. He removed his suit jacket and draped it across Rowan's shoulders against the evening chill. The gesture was simple, quiet, thoughtful. Rowan stared at him in surprise. Grayson merely looked out over the city. And somewhere inside the silence between them, trust began turning into something neither of them was ready to name. 3 days later, the investigation finally produced what everyone had been waiting for. Unfortunately, the answer created a far bigger problem than the mystery itself. It began with a routine audit. Grayson had ordered a complete review of internal communications connected to transportation schedules, security assignments, and executive travel records. Hundreds of documents passed through the hands of analysts. Thousands of messages were examined. Most revealed nothing unusual. Then one discrepancy appeared. A minor authorization request connected to the driver who had been detained after the gala. On its own, the document meant very little. The approval had been processed months earlier, buried among dozens of routine administrative actions. Yet something about it caught Rowan's attention when Grayson showed him the report. The signature looked correct. The approval chain looked correct. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. Rowan stared at the page longer than necessary. What are you seeing? Grayson asked. Rowan frowned. Not the document. The person behind it. Grayson leaned back. Explain. Rowan pointed toward the approval record. Whoever created this wanted it to survive scrutiny. They expected investigators to find it eventually. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Meaning this is not the real trail. Silence settled across the office. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Grayson called for additional records. By evening, a new pattern emerged. Small inconsistencies. Tiny adjustments scattered across multiple departments. None significant enough to trigger alarms individually. Together, they formed something else entirely. A carefully constructed network of influence operating inside the organization. The discovery shocked senior management. Emergency meetings were called. Security teams worked around the clock. Yet throughout the chaos, one person remained remarkably calm. Sebastian Knox. Rowan noticed it immediately. While executives argued and investigators scrambled to connect information, Sebastian appeared completely composed. Helpful. Cooperative. Professional. Exactly what everyone expected him to be. The problem was that Rowan had spent weeks observing people under pressure. And Sebastian was not reacting like an innocent man. He was reacting like someone monitoring a situation he already understood. That realization refused to leave Rowan's mind. The next afternoon, he found himself sitting across from Sebastian during a planning session. Several department heads filled the room. Discussions focused on damage control and internal restructuring. Throughout the meeting, Sebastian answered every question perfectly. Too perfectly. He anticipated concerns before they were raised. Redirected conversations before they became uncomfortable. Controlled the flow of information with effortless precision. Most people would have called it leadership. Rowan felt something colder. As the meeting ended, Sebastian lingered behind. You seem distracted lately, Rowan. His smile looked friendly. Rowan returned it politely. Long week. Understandable. Sebastian adjusted his cufflinks. Being at the center of an investigation cannot be easy. The words sounded harmless. Yet Rowan noticed something unusual. Sebastian's eyes never matched his smile. Not once. It lasted only a fraction of a second. A disconnect between expression and emotion. The kind Rowan had learned never to ignore. That evening, he shared his concerns with Grayson. The Alpha listened carefully, but said nothing for a long time. Finally, he walked toward the window overlooking the city. Sebastian has been with me for 15 years, he said quietly. He helped build this company. Rowan lowered his gaze. I know. He was there during the hardest years. Grayson's voice remained calm, but Rowan could hear the strain beneath it. I trusted him with everything. Rowan wished he could offer certainty. Instead, he offered honesty. I could be wrong. Grayson turned toward him. You have not been wrong yet. The words hung heavily in the room. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Rowan saw something he had never seen in Grayson before. Not anger. Not suspicion. Not frustration. Betrayal. Because somewhere deep inside, before a single piece of evidence had confirmed it, both of them had already begun to understand the truth. The person standing closest to Grayson Voss might also be the one who had been manipulating everything from the very beginning. The confirmation arrived 2 days later, and it changed everything. Investigators uncovered a series of hidden authorizations linked to offshore accounts, private communications, and internal approvals that should never have existed. None of the records carried Sebastian Knox's name directly, yet every trail curved back toward departments he controlled. Every discrepancy connected to decisions he had influenced. Every missing piece seemed to fit into a picture nobody wanted to see. When Grayson reviewed the final report, he sat silently for several minutes. Rowan remained across the office, watching the city beyond the windows. Neither spoke. There were no words capable of making the situation easier. 15 years of trust could not be replaced by a document. Eventually, Grayson closed the folder. I want proof he cannot explain away. Rowan nodded. You think he will try? I know he will. The next phase of the investigation unfolded carefully. Instead of confronting Sebastian immediately, Grayson allowed daily operations to continue. Meetings proceeded as normal. Schedules remained unchanged. To everyone outside a small circle of trusted personnel, nothing appeared different. Sebastian continued performing his duties with flawless professionalism. If he suspected anything, he never showed it. Yet Rowan noticed subtle changes. Sebastian spent more time checking reports personally. He began asking questions about security movements. More importantly, he started paying attention to Rowan. One afternoon, Rowan entered a conference room and found Sebastian already there. The older man greeted him warmly. "You and Grayson seem close these days." The comment sounded casual. Rowan knew better. "We work together." Sebastian smiled. Of course. But once again, the smile never reached his eyes. Later that evening, Rowan shared the encounter with Grayson. The Alpha's expression darkened slightly. "He is measuring risk." Rowan looked up. "Meaning me?" Meaning the one variable he did not anticipate. That realization lingered in Rowan's thoughts long after the conversation ended. For weeks he had assumed he was simply helping uncover the truth. Now he understood something else. His presence had disrupted a plan that may have existed for years. Whatever Sebastian wanted, Rowan's ability to notice details had become a genuine obstacle. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A trusted analyst discovered encrypted communications hidden inside routine administrative files. When investigators finally decoded them, a pattern emerged. Certain transportation assignments, executive schedules, and staffing changes had been quietly manipulated over time. Not enough to attract attention, just enough to influence outcomes. The evidence did not reveal every answer, but it revealed intent. Someone inside the organization had been shaping events from behind the scenes, and only one person possessed access to every affected department: Sebastian Knox. The discovery triggered a private meeting inside Grayson's office. Only a handful of trusted individuals attended. As evidence appeared on the screen, silence filled the room. Nobody argued. Nobody defended Sebastian. The facts spoke for themselves. Rowan watched Grayson carefully. The Alpha remained composed, but there was sadness beneath the control. Not because the truth surprised him anymore, because it confirmed what he had hoped was impossible. Hours later, Sebastian was invited to a confidential meeting. He entered the office with his usual confidence. For a brief moment, his gaze settled on Rowan. This time there was no friendliness left, only calculation. Grayson placed the evidence on the desk between them. The room grew very quiet. Sebastian looked at the documents. Then he looked at Grayson. To Rowan's surprise, he did not appear shocked. He appeared disappointed. "It was him, was it not?" Sebastian asked calmly, glancing toward Rowan. "The maid." Grayson said nothing. Sebastian gave a faint laugh. "One observant person." He shook his head slowly. Amazing how much damage one observant person can do. In that moment, Rowan finally understood. Sebastian had never underestimated investigators. He had underestimated the quiet servant nobody was supposed to notice. And that mistake had unraveled everything. 6 months later, the estate felt different. The tension that had once lingered in every hallway had faded, replaced by something steadier. Departments operated smoothly. Security protocols had been rebuilt. Trust, though damaged, had slowly begun to return. The city continued moving outside the glass walls of Grayson Voss's headquarters, but for the first time in a long while, the constant sense of uncertainty was gone. Rowan still found the change difficult to believe. Sometimes he caught himself expecting another hidden secret to emerge from the shadows. Another nervous glance. Another carefully concealed lie. Yet day after day, life continued without crisis. On a cool autumn morning, Rowan stood beside a window overlooking downtown traffic. Golden leaves drifted between skyscrapers while sunlight reflected across the river cutting through the city. The view was beautiful, peaceful, a word he had rarely associated with his life. A knock sounded behind him. "You are thinking again." Rowan smiled before turning around. Grayson stood in the doorway holding a folder beneath one arm. "I have been told that is allowed." "In moderation." Rowan laughed softly. Some things had changed over the past 6 months. Others had not. Grayson still approached every problem with the same quiet intensity. Rowan still noticed details nobody else seemed to see. The difference was that now they faced challenges together. The realization warmed him more than he expected. Later that afternoon, executives gathered for an important company meeting. It was the first major event since the organization completed its restructuring. Representatives from across the country attended. Investors filled conference rooms. Reporters waited outside. The atmosphere carried excitement instead of anxiety. As preparations continued, Grayson stood near the entrance adjusting his suit jacket. Employees hurried around them, carrying documents and tablets. Rowan watched the familiar scene unfold, and felt an unexpected sense of nostalgia. Months earlier, he had been an invisible servant moving through crowded hallways. Now people greeted him by name. They sought his opinion, trusted his judgment. Life had changed in ways he never imagined. Grayson glanced toward him. Something funny? Rowan shook his head. Just remembering. That is usually dangerous. Not always. Grayson handed him a neatly folded tie. Rowan stared at it for a moment before understanding. A smile slowly appeared. You could do this yourself. I could. Yet you never do. Correct. Rowan stepped forward and adjusted the tie with practiced ease. Around them, conversations continued. Phones rang. Assistants moved between offices. Nobody paid much attention to the quiet moment. For Rowan, however, it felt strangely significant. Months ago, he had adjusted a tie while delivering a warning that changed both of their lives. Today, there were no secrets, no threats, no hidden agendas, only trust. When he finished, he smoothed the fabric and stepped back. There. Grayson glanced down briefly before looking at him again. Perfect. Almost. Rowan straightened the knot one final time. Now it is perfect. For a second, neither moved. Then Grayson smiled. It was the same rare smile Rowan had gradually learned to recognize over the months. Genuine, unguarded, reserved only for a handful of moments and an even smaller number of people. Thank you, Grayson said quietly. Rowan felt his chest tighten in the best possible way. You are welcome. An assistant appeared moments later, reminding Grayson that the meeting was about to begin. The Alpha nodded before turning toward the conference hall. After taking several steps, he paused and looked back. Come with me. Rowan blinked. To the executive meeting? Yes. I am not an executive. Grayson's expression remained calm. You are the reason half of them still have jobs. Rowan laughed despite himself. Together they walked toward the conference hall as sunlight streamed through the towering windows. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do. But for the first time, neither of them faced it alone. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.